Blazor comes in two flavors. One is called Blazor Server, where the components are rendered on the server, and the signal R connection is used to communicate between server and client. The other is Blazor WebAssembly, where the compiled assemblies containing the Blazor components are sent to the browser. Blazor WebAssembly needs a runtime to parse the assemblies, and this runtime is in the WebAssembly format, as opposed to IL or binaries that are executed by a specific combination of CPU and operating system. WebAssembly is as the name implies. It is assembly for browsers, so it ensures that the runtime can run quite fast in the browser. Let's find out what the differences are between Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly in terms of project structure. Here's the application you get when using Visual Studio's Blazor template for a Blazor WebAssembly app, where a WebAssembly host builder is used to set the application up in Program CS. As the root component, a component called app is used, which is the Blazor component with the Razor file extension. It is rendered in an HTML element with the ID app, and we can find that element in the index.html file, located under the www root folder. Here's the app component. We'll see what it does later on. Just remember its structure for now. Now let's see what the Blazor Server application looks like when you create a new project in Visual Studio for it. The program CS looks more like the one we use for MVC and Razor Pages projects. It adds Razor Pages and server-side Blazor to the dependency injection container. And the signal R hub that server-side Blazor uses is mapped, and when the application receives an incoming request, it shows a Razor page called _host. A map fallback to page just means that any incoming URL should be mapped to that file. _host has the CS HTML extension. It isn't a Blazor component. It's a Razor page. It uses a layout page called _layout, which contains the base HTML structure of the page, with the HTML element, the head and the body. Note that this is written using Razor 2, as opposed to the index.html file I showed you in the WebAssembly application, which was just using plain HTML. Now back to the _host component that uses the layout page, we see that a tag helper component is used to render the app root component. It uses server pre-rendering as the render mode. That means the server will initially send the app component in rendered form to the browser, so the HTML for it will be generated on the server and sent directly to the browser. When the component needs to be updated visually, for example when the user clicks on it, it will use the two-way signal R connection between the browser and the server to re-render it. Anyways, the main point of this clip is that the two flavors of Blazor start up differently, but eventually render a component named app. And when I show app.razor in this Blazor server project, you can see that it is exactly the same as the one in the Blazor WebAssembly application. By default, app is the root component of every Blazor application, the outer box. The app component is identical for both the server and the WebAssembly flavor of Blazor, and all components in the application will be rendered, directly or indirectly, within this root component. The components we write in the application are the children, or grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, or great-great-grandchildren, and so on, of the app root component. A Blazor application structure, in terms of UI, is components within components within components. Whether you're using Blazor WebAssembly or Blazor Server, the way components are written is exactly the same. So you could start with a Blazor Server project, create components for that, and use them as is, should you decide to switch to a Blazor WebAssembly project at some point. However, there's an important thing to keep in mind. What you can do in a component used in WebAssembly mode is limited to what a browser can do, and in Blazor Server to what the server can do, which is a lot more. Let's say we want to access the file system with the file class in a component. On Blazor Server, this will give us access to the file system of the server. On Blazor WebAssembly, you maybe would expect to have access to the file system on the client. But giving the browser access to the file system would be a major security problem. So the browser just isn't allowed to do that. The same goes for directly accessing a SQL database, for instance. In the remainder of the course, I will show you components running on Blazor WebAssembly. But everything is applicable one-to-one to Blazor Server applications. I'm not going to use any code that won't work in the server edition of Blazor 2.